One thing that I wanted to finish on, Alan, in this particular part is religion in the country, and religion in the sense of England and then Britain becoming a Protestant island. And many talk about the Reformation in a way that you don't necessarily recognize. So people will talk about the Reformation as being this point in time where everything changed, but you argue that the English Reformation was actually an epiphenomenon of English culture. What do you mean by that?
Well, as with many things, you can see the Reformation as both a big change and a revolution and something that set things in another direction, and at the same time very continuous, and that's the nature of history. If you look at English belief and practice and ritual before the Reformation, you find many of the features of the post-Reformation there. For example, the rather ascetic, puritanistic aspects of the English Reformation are there in English life in many respects. If you look at, for example, the architecture of my college in Cambridge, King's College, and you look at the 15th century part of it before, it was all built before the Reformation. It was finished just as the Reformation was happening. And it is Protestant and ascetic and severe and all the things that we associate with Puritanism. If you look at the work of, for example, someone who was ended up very high in the Anglican Church, John Wycliffe, in the 15th century, 14th century, he was a Reformation thinker. He didn't like the Pope. He didn't believe in much of the Catholic belief, and his followers, the Lollards, were the same. So there was a very strong stream in England of Protestantism going right back to through the centuries. And Max Weber himself isn't widely known. Most people read his book, The Protestant Ethic. But if you look at his wider work on the religions of the West, he recognizes that there is this Protestant stream going back even into the early church. And indeed, the Protestants argued that this had been lost, that the overlay of Catholicism had overlaid what was always there, which was the simple message of Jesus and so on and so on. And that all you were doing was recovering that. So I think the Reformation was immensely important. For example, if you hadn't had, and I've just written a piece on this, the Reformation started in my college in King's, in a pub on the edge of my college, within it, called the White Hart. There's a blue plaque. If anyone visits Cambridge, they should look at the blue plaque, which says, this is where the Protestant Reformation, one of the places it started, and it started in an inn called the White Hart, where the great writers and translators of the Reformation, Whitgift and Aylmer and other people, congregated and discussed the new writings coming from Germany and translated them and then preached them and persuaded Henry VIII to go with it. So, and if that hadn't happened, if there hadn't been that pub, if King's hadn't existed, we would now be living in a Catholic Europe. Because without the switch of Britain, the growing power, to Protestantism, it would have almost certainly been wiped out in the small pockets where it was beginning to flourish in northern Germany and Holland. And so that small accident of Anne Boleyn wanting to marry Anne Boleyn. So this is the beauty of history. You've got the great forces that England was always Protestant argument, plus the attraction of one man to one woman, Anne Boleyn, which led by chance to our present world.
Mm. It's fascinating, all of these hinge moments in history. And to put a finer point on that, Protestantism being a natural reflection of the English, is what you're getting at the way the English lived this individual, very loose community, though there was a civil society that was created out of these volunteer groups of people getting together to work on things. It's quite transactional. Whereas when you look at the southern European nations, and I think lots of us can look enviously towards them when they go, oh, look how tightly knit they are, but they live in multi-generational households. And you've said that never really happened in English history. Is Protestantism an epiphenomenon because ultimately it was a more truer reflection of how the English lived and governed themselves through the common law than Roman law, where there was that diktat from the top and a much more tight community? Is that on the right lines, or am I totally off there?
No, that's it's not exactly an epiphenomenon, but it's part of a package. Because ideology both reflects and creates things. So the extreme individualism of the English in their economic and legal systems, that each person has their rights and duties in law and is treated as equal and so on, the fact that they have advanced private property and ownership of their own means of production and so on, all that individualism and protection of the individual means that people don't sit easily with being told what to do. And you can find it in many other things. The English pub, for example, is another part of it. And that's why it's rather nice that the English Reformation began in a pub. You know, you stand around at the bar and you say, what are these useless politicians doing now? Now, you know, in most countries you'd be sent off to prison for such talk, and there would be spies listening and so on. But in England, you can talk about how useless the government is, and you want to do this and that and so on. So it's all part of a fairly egalitarian, self-confident, well-educated, affluent sort of society, which goes back. And if you want to see it in action in a beautiful, poetic form, read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I mean, these opinionated, bossy, tough, somewhat obscene characters who tell their tales are English. And they're, you know, the women are telling their tales, the men are telling their tales, the ordinary people, the knights and so on. And they all reflect great self-confidence, great private views about all sorts of things. And you wouldn't find something like the Canterbury Tales, I don't think, in any other culture at that time.